My husband made me breakfast for the first time in 15 years. Something felt wrong. So I gave it to his secretary instead. What happened next will haunt me forever. If you've ever ignored your gut feeling, you need to hear this story. Stay until the end, the twist will shock you. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell because this story proves that your instincts can literally save your life. Hello, my dear listeners. This is Aunt Clara, and today I'm sharing a story that still sends chills down my spine every time I think about it. This is the story of Margaret Chen, a 42-year-old accountant from Portland, Oregon, whose intuition saved her life in the most unexpected way. Margaret had been married to David for 15 years. 15 long years that had slowly transformed from passionate romance into cold routine. They lived in a beautiful 3-story Victorian home in the Pearl District, the kind of house that appears in architectural magazines. But beauty on the outside often hides darkness within. David was a successful pharmaceutical sales representative, always impeccably dressed, always charming to outsiders. But Margaret knew a different David. The David who came home late smelling of perfume. The David who had become increasingly distant. The David whose phone was always face down on the table, always locked with a passcode she didn't know. For the past year, Margaret had noticed the changes. David had hired a new secretary, Vanessa Morrison, a 28-year-old blonde with a perfect smile, and an even more perfect figure. Margaret had met her once at the company holiday party. Vanessa had been polite, professional, almost too sweet. But Margaret had seen the way David looked at her. She'd seen the way Vanessa's hand lingered on David's arm just a second too long. Margaret wasn't stupid. She'd found the receipts for expensive jewelry she'd never received. She'd noticed the sudden interest David had taken in his appearance, the gym membership, the new signs. But confronting him seemed pointless. What would she say? What proof did she have beyond a wife's intuition? Then came that Tuesday morning. October 17th. A date Margaret would never forget. She woke up to the smell of vanilla and cinnamon. Confused, she pulled on her robe and walked downstairs to find David in the kitchen, wearing an apron she didn't even know they owned, standing over a spread of what looked like a gourmet breakfast. "Good morning, sweetheart," David said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I made you breakfast." Margaret stood frozen in the doorway. In 15 years of marriage, David had never made her breakfast. Not once. He was the kind of man who poured cereal and called it cooking. On the table sat Belgian waffles with fresh strawberries, scrambled eggs with herbs, crispy bacon, and a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. It looked like something from a 5-star brunch menu. "What's the occasion?" Margaret asked, her voice cautious. David's smile wavered for just a fraction of a second. "Do I need an occasion to do something nice for my wife? I've been thinking we've been distant lately. I want to work on us. I want to be a better husband." The words were right. The presentation was right. But something felt terribly, terribly wrong. Margaret couldn't put her finger on it. Was it the way David's hands trembled slightly as he poured her coffee? Was it the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes? Or was it something deeper, something primal screaming at her from the depths of her subconscious? "This looks amazing," Margaret said slowly, sitting down at the table. She picked up her fork, looking at the beautifully arranged plate. The eggs were perfectly fluffy. The waffles were golden brown. Everything looked absolutely perfect. Too perfect. David sat across from her, his own plate untouched. "Aren't you eating?" Margaret asked. "I already ate while I was cooking," David said quickly. "I couldn't wait. But I want to watch you enjoy it. Please, sweetheart. Eat." There it was again. That feeling. Like ice water in her veins. Margaret lifted a forkful of eggs toward her mouth. She could smell the herbs, rosemary, perhaps, and something else she couldn't identify. Something slightly bitter under the savory aroma. Her hand stopped halfway to her mouth. Is something wrong? David asked, and there was an edge to his voice now, a tightness. I just remembered, Margaret said, setting down her fork. I have that early meeting today with the Henderson account. I'm running late already. You have time to eat, David insisted. The meeting isn't until 9. It's only 7:30. I need to prepare, Margaret said, standing up. I'm so sorry, honey. This looks wonderful. I feel terrible. She could see the frustration flickering across David's face before he smoothed it away. Of course, he said stiffly. Your work is always more important. Margaret grabbed her briefcase and headed toward the door, her heart pounding. She didn't know why she was fleeing her own kitchen, why her hands were shaking as she grabbed her car keys. But every instinct in her body was screaming at her to get away from that breakfast, away from David, away from whatever was happening in that house. Margaret sat in her car in the driveway, breathing hard. She looked at the beautiful breakfast still sitting on the table, visible through the kitchen window. David was standing there, staring at the uneaten food, his face unreadable. What was wrong with her? Was she being paranoid? Crazy? Here was her husband, trying to do something nice, and she'd run away like a frightened animal. But she couldn't shake the feeling. That terrible, gnawing certainty that something was desperately wrong. She started the car and drove, not toward her office but aimlessly through the morning streets of Portland. The city was just waking up, coffee shops opening, commuters hurrying to their cars. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that Margaret's world was tilting on its axis. After 20 minutes of driving, she found herself parked outside a small cafe near David's office building. She didn't know why she'd come here. But as she sat there, nursing a coffee she didn't want, she saw something that made her blood run cold. David's car pulled into the parking lot of his building. And he wasn't alone. Vanessa Morrison was in the passenger seat. They'd driven to work together. At 8:15 in the morning. After David had supposedly been home making breakfast. Margaret watched as they got out of the car. Watched as David's hand touched the small of Vanessa's back. Watched as Vanessa looked up at him with an expression that was anything but professional. So it was true. All of it. The affair she'd suspected, the lies, the deception. But that didn't explain the breakfast. That didn't explain the fear that had gripped her at her own kitchen table. Margaret made a decision. She got out of her car and walked across the street, into David's building. She knew the layout well from company events. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where David's office was located. The secretary desk outside David's office was already occupied. Vanessa Morrison sat there, looking fresh and professional in a crisp white blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Margaret. Vanessa said, surprise evident in her voice. What are you doing here? I need to talk to David, Margaret said, keeping her voice steady. Is he in? He's on a conference call right now, Vanessa said. But I can let him know you're here as soon as he's done. Margaret nodded, but she didn't leave. She stood there, studying Vanessa. The younger woman looked uncomfortable under her gaze. Vanessa, Margaret said slowly. Can I ask you something? Of course. Has David been acting strange lately? Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. Strange. I don't know what you mean. Nervous. Secretive. More than usual. Vanessa bit her lip. Mrs. Chen, I don't think I should please, Margaret said, and something in her voice made Vanessa pause. I'm not here to make trouble. I just need to know. Vanessa looked toward David's closed office door, then back at Margaret. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He's been stressed. Really stressed. He's been on the phone a lot, having conversations he doesn't want me to hear. And last week, I found him searching something on his computer about life insurance policies. The ice in Margaret's veins turned to frost. Life insurance. Your life insurance specifically. He was looking at the policy documents. The world seemed to tilt. Margaret grabbed the edge of Vanessa's desk to steady herself. Mrs. Chen, are you okay? Vanessa asked, standing up. You look pale. Should I get you some water? Margaret shook her head. Her mind was racing. David checking her life insurance. David making her breakfast for the first time in 15 years. David insisting she eat. David's hands trembling. The bitter smell under the herbs. Vanessa, Margaret said, her voice shaking now. That breakfast David made this morning. I didn't eat it. I left it at home. What breakfast? He said he made it specially for me. But I had a bad feeling. I couldn't eat it. Margaret looked at Vanessa intensely. I need you to do something for me. It's going to sound crazy, but I need you to trust me. What? I need you to go to my house. The door is unlocked. The breakfast is still on the table. I need you to take that food and have it tested. Vanessa stared at her. Tested? For what? For poison. The word hung in the air between them like a physical thing. You can't be serious, Vanessa whispered. I have never been. Thought David might come after me if he knew what I'd done. And they told me something. David took out a $2 million life insurance policy on you 6 months ago. You're the beneficiary on his policy too, but his is only for $500,000. And Mrs. Chen, I need to tell you something else. Something I should have told you earlier. What? David and I were not having an affair. We never were. But he's been asking me to lie about it. He wanted me to pretend we were together. He said he was going to divorce you, and he needed evidence of infidelity to avoid paying alimony. He offered me money. A lot of money. But I felt wrong about it, so I kept putting him off. I never understood why he was so insistent until now. Margaret's mind reeled. He wanted to frame himself for cheating. As a backup plan, I think. If the poison didn't work, or if it was discovered, he could claim he was just a cheater going through a messy divorce, not a murderer. He was creating an alternative narrative. Mrs. Chen, your husband has been planning this for months. Maybe longer. The phone almost slipped from Margaret's hands. Where is he now? That's why I'm calling. He left the office an hour ago. He said he was going home for lunch. Mrs. Chen, you can't go back there. You need to go straight to the police. Margaret ended the call and sat in her car, staring at nothing. 15 years. She'd spent 15 years of her life with a man who had calmly, methodically planned to murder her. Who had smiled at her that morning while serving her poisoned eggs. Who had probably been fantasizing about her funeral while urging her to eat. How many times had he thought about it? How many nights had he lain beside her, planning her death? How long had she been sleeping next to a monster? She drove to the police station in a daze. Detective Sarah Mendoza took her statement, along with the lab results Vanessa had provided. Sarah was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and more serious in my life, Margaret said. Please, Vanessa. I know about you and David. I know you've been seeing him. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that I think my husband tried to kill me this morning, and I need to prove it. Vanessa's face had gone white. Mrs. Chen, I mean, David and I please, Margaret interrupted. You can explain later. Right now, I just need you to help me. Go to my house. Get that breakfast. Take it to a testing facility. There's a private lab on Morrison Street that does toxicology tests, no questions asked. I'll pay for it. Vanessa stood there, torn. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said. I'll do it. But Mrs. Chen, what if you're wrong? Then I'm a paranoid wife who wasted your morning, Margaret said. But what if I'm right? Margaret spent the next 3 hours in her car, parked in a grocery store lot, unable to go home, unable to go to work, unable to do anything but wait. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from David. David, where are you? David, why aren't you at your office? David, Margaret, answer me. David, are you okay? I'm worried. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Every message felt like a trap. At 11:47 a.m., her phone rang. Vanessa. Mrs. Chen, Vanessa's voice was shaking. You need to sit down. Are you sitting down? What did they find? Margaret asked, though she already knew. She'd known from the moment she smelled that breakfast. Antifreeze, Vanessa said, and Margaret could hear tears in her voice. The eggs had ethylene glycol mixed into them. A lethal dose. The lab tech said if you'd eaten that breakfast, you'd be dead within 24 hours. It would have looked like kidney failure. Natural causes. Margaret felt numb. It was one thing to suspect. Another thing entirely to know. There's more, Vanessa continued. After I got the results, I went to the police. I was scared, Mrs. Chen. A no-nonsense demeanor. Mrs. Chen, Sarah said gently, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions. Had there been any arguments? Any reason for your husband to want you dead beyond the insurance money? Margaret shook her head. We were distant but not fighting. I was planning to ask for a divorce eventually, but I hadn't said anything yet. I don't understand why he didn't just leave me. $2 million, Sarah said simply. Plus the house, your savings, your retirement accounts. In a divorce, he'd have to split everything. This way he gets it all, and he gets to play the grieving widower. So I was worth more dead than alive, Margaret said numbly. To him, yes. But Mrs. Chen, you're alive. You trusted your instincts and you're alive. Now we need to build a case. The case came together quickly. The police obtained a warrant for David's computer and found his search history, untraceable poisons, how to fake natural death, antifreeze detection in autopsies, grieving widower support groups. He'd been careless in his research, perhaps overconfident. They found the bottle of antifreeze in his car, hidden under the driver's seat, still half full. They found emails to Vanessa pressuring her to participate in his fake affair scheme. They found the life insurance policies, the beneficiary forms, everything. David was arrested at his office at 4:30 p.m. Margaret wasn't there to see it, but Vanessa called her afterward, her voice shaking. He didn't even seem surprised, Vanessa said. When they came for him, he just looked resigned. Like he'd been expecting it. Mrs. Chen, he asked me to tell you something. What? He said, tell her I'm sorry she didn't eat the breakfast. Margaret felt bile rise in her throat. Even now, even caught, he couldn't acknowledge what he'd done. He was sorry his plan had failed, not sorry for trying to murder her. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Margaret sat in the courtroom every single day, watching the men sheet. Married transform from charming husband to desperate defendant to, finally, convicted attempted murderer. David's lawyer tried every angle. He claimed the antifreeze had been in the garage and somehow contaminated the eggs accidentally. He suggested Margaret had poisoned her own breakfast to frame David. He argued that the search history was for a novel David was writing. Each argument was more absurd than the last. The prosecution's case was airtight. They had the poisoned breakfast tested and documented. They had the search history, the life insurance policies, the half-empty antifreeze bottle with David's fingerprints. They had Vanessa's testimony about David's attempts to create a fake affair. And they had Margaret's testimony about David's insistence that she eat, his refusal to taste the food himself, his trembling hands. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, David's credit card records. He had purchased the antifreeze 2 weeks earlier. But that same day, he'd also bought a sympathy card. The prosecution produced it in court. It was still in its packaging, found in David's desk drawer at home. On the front it read, "In your time of loss." He'd bought the card to give to himself. To express condolences to himself for the wife he was planning to murder. The courtroom went silent when the prosecutor held up that card. Even the jury looked shaken. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a moment of anger or temporary insanity. This was premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded attempted murder. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. David Chen was found guilty of attempted first-degree murder. During sentencing, the judge looked at David with unconcealed disgust. "Mr. Chen," she said, "you violated the most fundamental trust a person can have. Your wife trusted you to prepare her food, trusted you not to harm her, trusted you with her life. And you planned, meticulously and without remorse, to betray that trust in the most permanent way possible. You were willing to watch her die slowly from organ failure, all for money. You're not just an attempted murderer. You're a coward and a traitor to every vow you made." David was sentenced to 25 years in prison, without the possibility of parole for 15 years. As the bailiffs led him away, David looked at Margaret one last time. She couldn't read his expression. Regret? Anger? Indifference? She realized in that moment that she'd never really known him at all. The men she'd married had been a carefully constructed fiction. The real David Chen was a stranger capable of unthinkable cruelty. The year following David's conviction was the hardest of Margaret's life. She sold the Victorian house in the Pearl District. She couldn't live there anymore, couldn't walk into that kitchen without seeing David standing over that poisoned breakfast, smiling his false smile. She moved into a smaller apartment in Hawthorne, started therapy, and tried to rebuild her shattered sense of trust in the world. The nightmares were the worst part. She'd dream she'd eaten the breakfast. She'd dream of waking up in a hospital bed, her kidneys failing, David sitting beside her holding her hand, whispering about how much he loved her as she died. She'd wake up gasping, checking her pulse, reassuring herself that she was alive. Her therapist, Dr. Rebecca Kim, helped her understand that she was grieving. Not just for her marriage, but for her sense of safety, for her ability to trust her judgment of people, for the 15 years she'd spent loving someone who'd never loved her back. "But you should also recognize your strength," Dr. Kim told her during one session. "You trusted your instincts when every logical part of your brain was probably telling you you were being paranoid. You listened to that quiet voice of intuition, and it saved your life." Margaret had never thought of it that way. She'd been so focused on how she'd missed the signs of David's true nature, she hadn't considered that she'd actually caught the most important sign of all. "Your unconscious mind saw things your conscious mind didn't want to see," Dr. Kim continued. "The trembling hands, the insistence that you eat, the refusal to taste the food himself, his unusual behavior. Your intuition processed all of it and sent you a warning signal. And you listened." Slowly, over months and then years, Margaret began to heal. She made new friends, people who had no connection to David or her old life. She threw herself into her work, eventually starting her own accounting firm. She reconnected with her sister in Seattle, whom she'd drifted away from during her marriage. And she became an advocate. Margaret started speaking at domestic violence prevention seminars, sharing her story. Because she learned something crucial: her experience wasn't unique. Intimate partner violence isn't always physical, she told audiences. Sometimes it's a husband who poisons your breakfast. Sometimes it's emotional abuse that slowly erodes your sense of self. Sometimes it's financial control that traps you. But it all comes from the same place: a fundamental disrespect for your humanity, your autonomy, your right to exist as a separate person with your own needs and desires. She talked about red flags, about trusting your instincts, about the importance of maintaining your own identity and support system within a marriage. She talked about how love shouldn't require you to ignore your gut feelings or explain away behaviors that make you uncomfortable. And people listened. Margaret received hundreds of emails from women and men who'd trusted their instincts and left dangerous situations. Some had been as dramatic as hers. Others had been quieter but no less important, leaving emotionally abusive partners, escaping controlling relationships, recognizing manipulation before it turned into something worse. Margaret kept in touch with Vanessa Morrison. The younger woman had been traumatized by her unwitting role in David's plan, and had quit her job at the pharmaceutical company shortly after the trial. They met for coffee one afternoon, 6 months after David's sentencing. Vanessa looked different, older somehow, more serious, with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "I keep thinking about it," Vanessa said, stirring her latte without drinking it. "What if I'd agreed to his fake affair plan? What if I'd said yes to the money and lied about sleeping with him? Would he have gone through with the divorce instead? Would you still be married to him, not knowing what he was capable of? Or," Margaret said gently, "he might have poisoned me anyway and used you as an alibi. I was with my mistress when my wife mysteriously died. You could have been complicit in murder without even knowing it." Vanessa shuddered. "I can't believe I worked for him for 2 years and never saw it. He seemed so normal. So professional. So charming. That's what makes people like David so dangerous," Margaret said. "They're not the obvious villains. They're the charming ones, the successful ones, the ones who seem to have it all together. Nobody suspects them because they're so good at wearing masks." "How do you do it?" Vanessa asked suddenly. "How do you trust anyone after something like this?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I don't know if I'll ever trust the way I did before. That naive, complete trust where you never question anything. That's gone. But I'm learning a different kind of trust. One that's informed by experience, that pays attention to actions more than words, that maintains healthy boundaries. It's not less valuable. It's just more realistic. I'm scared of relationships now," Vanessa admitted. "I've been on 2 dates since everything happened and both times I found myself looking for red flags, overanalyzing everything they said, wondering if they were secretly planning to hurt me." "That's normal," Margaret said. "Trauma changes how we see the world. But Vanessa, you saved my life. You could have dismissed me as a paranoid, jealous wife. You could have refused to help. But you didn't. You chose to believe me, to act, to do the right thing even when it must have seemed crazy. That took courage." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared. When I got those lab results and realized you were right, that the food really was poisoned, I thought I was going to throw up. And then I thought, what if he'd asked me to deliver that breakfast to you? What if I'd been the one to hand you poisoned food without knowing it? What if?" "But you didn't," Margaret interrupted firmly. "You didn't, and I'm alive because of you. You need to forgive yourself for things that didn't happen." Through her advocacy work, Margaret connected with Dr. James Patterson, a forensic psychologist who specialized in cases of intimate partner murder. He helped her understand the mind of someone like David. "Most people can't conceive of planning to murder someone they once loved," Dr. Patterson explained during one of their conversations. "They think there must be some huge triggering event, some dramatic betrayal or conflict. But the truth is often more banal. Financial gain is one of the most common motives for spousal murder, especially when combined with narcissistic personality traits." "Was David a narcissist?" Margaret asked. "Based on the case details, he exhibited many of the traits," Dr. Patterson said. "The charm, the carefully constructed public image, the ability to lie without apparent guilt, the view of you as an object to be used rather than a person to be valued. Narcissists see other people as extensions of themselves or as obstacles to their desires. When you ceased to be useful and became an obstacle, or when he decided that your life insurance money was more valuable than your presence, he felt entitled to dispose of you." "But we were together for 15 years. He must have cared about me at some point. Dr. Patterson shook his head gently. Margaret, I'm going to tell you something that's hard to hear. He probably never loved you the way you loved him. People with severe narcissistic personality disorder don't form genuine emotional bonds. They form transactional relationships. You were useful to him. You provided companionship, social status, financial stability, the appearance of normalcy. When the transaction no longer favored him, he was willing to end it in the most permanent way possible. So all of it was fake. The entire marriage. Your experience of it was real. Your love was real. Your commitment was real. But his was always conditional, always transactional. The man you loved never actually existed. He was a performance, carefully calibrated to get what he wanted from you. This was perhaps the hardest truth for Margaret to accept. She'd spent 15 years building a life with someone who'd never been real. Every memory, every moment of happiness, every time she'd thought they were connecting, it had all been one-sided. She'd been in love with a ghost. But understanding this helped her heal. It allowed her to stop blaming herself for missing the signs, stop wondering what she could have done differently, stop thinking that if she'd just been a better wife, he wouldn't have tried to kill her. Nothing you could have done would have changed him, Dr. Patterson assured her. You could have been perfect, and he still would have valued money over your life. This was always about his character deficits, never about your worth. Margaret's story made national news. Woman's intuition foils husband's murder plot ran in newspapers across the country. She appeared on several morning shows, telling her story, emphasizing the importance of trusting your instincts. But the attention brought something unexpected. Dozens of similar stories came to light. A woman in Texas whose husband had been slowly poisoning her coffee with arsenic for months. She'd started feeling inexplicably ill every morning, but only when she drank the coffee her husband made. On a whim, she'd taken a sample to be tested. He was arrested 3 days later. A man in Florida whose wife had tampered with his blood pressure medication, substituting his pills with a drug that would cause a fatal heart attack. He'd noticed the pills looked slightly different and had them analyzed. She confessed to the scheme when confronted. A woman in Michigan who'd found research on natural ways to cause fatal accidents on her husband's computer. She'd set up hidden cameras and caught him loosening the bolts on her car's wheels. He was arrested before the sabotage could cause a crash. Each story was different in its details but the same in its essence: a partner who'd decided murder was easier than divorce, who'd planned and plotted and waited for the right moment, who'd been stopped by a combination of intuition, luck and courage. Margaret connected with some of these survivors. They formed an informal support group, meeting online monthly to share their experiences and their healing journeys. They called themselves the Survivors Circle. "We're the lucky ones," said Patricia from Texas during one meeting. "We listened to that voice inside us that said something was wrong. How many people didn't? How many people are dead because they ignored their instincts or didn't have the opportunity to test their suspicions?" It was a sobering thought. The FBI estimates that hundreds of intimate partner murders occur each year in the United States alone. How many of those victims had felt that same flutter of unease, that same inexplicable reluctance, but had pushed it aside? Trust your instincts became the mantra of the Survivors Circle. They shared it with anyone who would listen. They created resources, wrote articles, spoke at conferences. They wanted people to know that you don't need proof to protect yourself. You don't need evidence to leave a situation that feels wrong. Your intuition is valid, your fear is reasonable, your desire for safety is paramount. 3 years after David's conviction, Margaret did something her therapist had been encouraging her to consider. She went to visit him in prison. She'd resisted for years. Why would she want to see him? What could he possibly say that would matter? But Dr. Kim had suggested that confronting him might provide closure, might help Margaret process the anger and betrayal she still carried. The prison was a bleak place, all concrete and harsh fluorescent lighting. Margaret sat in the visitor's room, her hands clenched in her lap, waiting for David to be brought in. When he appeared, She almost didn't recognize him. Prison had aged him. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and he'd gained weight. He looked like what he was, a middle-aged man facing the consequences of his choices. He sat down across from her, picking up the phone on his side of the glass partition. Margaret picked up hers. "Margaret," he said, and his voice was the same. That was somehow worse than if it had changed. "I didn't think you'd ever come." "I almost didn't," she said. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for me. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth for once in your life." "Okay. Why? Why not just divorce me? Why try to kill me?" David was quiet for a long moment. Who'd tried to kill her and told him exactly what she thought of him? She was done being a victim. She was a survivor. 5 years after that poisoned breakfast, Margaret Chen stood on a stage at a national domestic violence prevention conference. Her accounting firm was thriving, she'd published a book about her experience, and she'd helped establish a foundation that provided free toxicology testing for people who suspected they were being poisoned by intimate partners. "My story could have ended very differently," she told the audience of advocates, law enforcement officers, and survivors. "If I'd been a little less suspicious, a little more trusting, a little more concerned about seeming paranoid or hurting my husband's feelings, I would be dead. And David would have gotten away with it." She paused, looking out at the hundreds of faces watching her. "We teach women to be nice, to be accommodating, to give people the benefit of the doubt. We teach them that their intuition is paranoia, that their fear is overreaction. We gaslight them into ignoring the very instincts that evolution gave them to keep them safe. And then we wonder why intimate partner violence is so common." The audience was silent, riveted. "I'm here to tell you, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone's behavior doesn't make sense, there's probably a reason. If you feel unsafe, you probably are. You don't need proof. You don't need evidence. You don't need anyone's permission to protect yourself." Margaret shared statistics. According to the CDC, approximately 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Intimate partner homicides account for approximately 40 to 50% of all female homicides in the United States. Financial gain is a significant motive in many spousal murders with life insurance. Then he said, "The money. The house. Everything we'd built. I'd worked hard for that life, and I wasn't going to give up half of it. So I was worth more dead than divorced. Yes." No hesitation, no sugarcoating. Just cold, simple truth. "Did you ever love me?" Margaret asked, though she already knew the answer. David tilted his head, considering. "I loved what you represented. The stability, the respectability. You were perfect for my image. But love like you mean it? No. I don't think I'm capable of that." Margaret felt a strange sense of relief. The confirmation of what she'd suspected, what Dr. Patterson had told her, was painful but also liberating. She could finally stop wondering. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "I regret getting caught," David said. "If you'd eaten that breakfast, if you'd died like you were supposed to, I'd be living in that house right now with your life insurance money, and everyone would be sympathizing with me about my tragic loss. I'd be free." Margaret felt sick. "You're a monster." "I'm practical," David corrected. "I saw an obstacle and I planned to remove it. That's just problem solving. I'm not an obstacle. I'm a person. I was your wife." "You were my wife," David agreed. "And then you were a problem that needed solving. That's all." Margaret stood up. "I hope you spend every day for the next 25 years thinking about what you lost. Not me, you never valued me anyway. But your freedom, your reputation, your life. All thrown away because you were too cheap and too cowardly to just file for divorce." Margaret, she hung up the phone and walked out, not looking back. In the parking lot, she sat in her car and cried. Not for David, not for their marriage, but for the wasted years, for the trust that had been violated, for the innocence she'd lost. But when the tears stopped, she felt lighter somehow. She'd confronted the monster and survived. She'd looked into the eyes of the man. Policies often playing a role. But beyond the statistics, Margaret shared hope. She talked about healing, about rebuilding, about learning to trust again. She talked about the community she'd found among other survivors, the purpose she'd discovered in advocacy, the strength she'd developed through surviving the unimaginable. David tried to take everything from me, Margaret said, her voice strong. My life, my sense of safety, my ability to trust. And for a while, he almost succeeded. But I'm here. I'm alive. I'm thriving. And every day I live well is a victory over him, and everyone like him. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After her speech, dozens of people approached Margaret. Some shared their own stories. Some asked for advice. One woman, around 35 with fearful eyes, pulled her aside. My husband has been acting strange, she whispered. Making me meals he won't eat himself. Insisting I take vitamins he buys for me. I've been feeling sick. I thought I was crazy for suspecting anything. Margaret took her hand. You're not crazy. Here's what you're going to do. She pulled out a card for the Foundation's testing service. Take samples of anything he gives you: food, drinks, vitamins, medications. We'll test them for free, completely confidentially. And in the meantime, don't eat or drink anything he prepares. Tell him you're doing a cleanse, you're fasting, you have food allergies, whatever you need to say. And start making an exit plan. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you for telling your story. Thank you for making me feel like I'm not insane. Your intuition is trying to protect you, Margaret said. Listen to it. Margaret watched the woman walk away, and felt the purpose that had emerged from her trauma. She couldn't save herself from those 15 years with David, couldn't take back the betrayal, or the fear, or the poisoned breakfast. But she could save others. She could be the voice that said trust yourself when the world said you're overreacting. Margaret's work with the Foundation expanded rapidly. They'd tested over 500 samples in the first 3 years of operation. Of those, 73 tested positive for toxic substances: antifreeze, arsenic, rat poison, prescription medications in lethal doses, cleaning chemicals, and more. 73 people whose partners had been slowly poisoning them. 73 attempted murders caught before they could succeed. 73 lives saved. Each case resulted in arrests, trials, convictions. The Foundation worked with law enforcement to ensure the evidence was properly documented and admissible in court. They provided support to victims, connecting them with lawyers, therapists, and safe housing. The Foundation also conducted research. They discovered patterns. Most poisoning attempts involved antifreeze or prescription medications because these were readily available and their symptoms mimicked natural illness. Most victims were women, but approximately 20% were men. Most perpetrators showed signs of financial stress or were involved in extramarital affairs. And critically, most victims had expressed concerns about their partner's behavior before the poisoning was discovered, but had been dismissed by friends, family, or even doctors. We need to change the culture, Margaret said during a meeting with the Foundation's board. We need to make it socially acceptable for people to protect themselves, even if it means seeming paranoid or suspicious. Better to test food unnecessarily than to die trusting someone who shouldn't be trusted. The Foundation launched a public awareness campaign, Better Safe Than Sorry, Trust Your Instincts. They created resources for doctors, teaching them to recognize signs of poisoning, and to take patients' concerns seriously when they suspected their partners. They worked with law enforcement to train officers in how to investigate suspected poisoning cases. And they created. Said, her voice weak. Thank you for coming. I know you didn't have to. I'm not sure why I did, Margaret admitted, sitting in the chair beside the bed. Because you want to understand, Patricia said. I saw it in your eyes at the trial. You kept looking at David like he was a puzzle you couldn't solve. How could the man you married, the man you loved, be capable of such evil? Margaret nodded slowly. He was always different, Patricia said. Even as a child. Cold. Calculating. He never cried, not even as a baby. He never formed attachments to his toys or his pets. When his goldfish died, he just shrugged. When his dog was hit by a car, he didn't shed a tear. I thought maybe he was just practical, unemotional. His father was like that too. She paused, catching her breath. But it was more than that. When he was 10, I caught him hurting neighborhood cats. He wasn't doing it out of cruelty or anger that would have been bad enough, but at least understandable. He was doing it experimentally. He wanted to see what would happen. How much pain they could endure. How long they would survive. Margaret felt sick. We got him therapy. Lots of therapy. The psychologist said he had antisocial personality disorder. What they used to call sociopathy. He said David lacked empathy, couldn't form genuine emotional connections, saw other people and animals as objects rather than beings with feelings. He said it wasn't something that could be cured, only managed. Why are you telling me this? Margaret asked. Because I want you to know it wasn't your fault, Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. Nothing you did or didn't do caused David to try to kill you. He was broken from the beginning. I hoped, when he married you, that maybe he'd learn to fake it well enough that he could have a normal life. That maybe the therapy had helped. But all it did was teach him to. A discreet testing kit that could be purchased online or picked up at women's shelters, domestic violence centers, and certain pharmacies. The kit included instructions for safely collecting samples and information on how to submit them for testing. It was designed to look like a regular medical kit, so partners wouldn't become suspicious if they saw it. The response was overwhelming. Within the first year, over 10,000 kits were distributed. And while most tests came back negative, just people being cautious, protecting themselves, every positive test was a life saved, a murder prevented, a perpetrator caught. Margaret also worked to change laws. In Oregon, largely due to her advocacy, legislation was passed making it easier to prosecute attempted murder by poisoning. Other states followed suit. The Margaret Chen law, as it became known in advocacy circles, closed loopholes that had allowed some poisoners to be charged only with assault rather than attempted murder. 7 years after David's conviction, Margaret received an unexpected letter. It was from David's mother, Patricia Chen, whom Margaret hadn't spoken to since the trial. Patricia was in her 70s now, living in a nursing home in Sacramento. The letter was brief. Dear Margaret, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what my son did. But I'm dying, and I need to speak with you before I go. There are things you should know about David, about his childhood, about why he became what he became. Please, if you can find it in your heart, come see me. Patricia. Margaret almost threw the letter away. Why should she care about David's childhood or his mother's death? But something made her keep it. After a week of deliberation, she booked a flight to Sacramento. Patricia Chen looked frail in her nursing home bed, hooked up to oxygen, her skin paper-thin. But her eyes were alert, intelligent, filled with a sadness that seemed bone-deep. Margaret, she hide what he was better. Did you know? Margaret asked quietly. Did you suspect what he might do? Patricia shook her head. I knew he was capable of it. I'd always known. But I hoped he wouldn't. I prayed he wouldn't. And when I heard what he'd done, I wasn't surprised, but I was devastated. My son, the man I raised, had become a monster. Or maybe he'd always been one, and I'd just been too afraid to admit it. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm sorry, Patricia whispered. For David, for what he did, for the years you lost, for the trauma you endured. I'm sorry I brought him into this world. I'm sorry I couldn't fix him. It's not your fault either, Margaret said, and she meant it. You did the best you could with a child who was fundamentally incapable of what you were trying to teach him. Patricia smiled weakly. That's kind of you to say. Kinder than I deserve. But Margaret, there's one more thing. One more reason I needed to see you. What? David has a daughter. From before he met you. A one-night stand in his 20s. The mother kept her, raised her alone. David paid child support but never had any involvement in her life. I stayed in touch with her, though. Sent birthday cards, Christmas presents. Her name is Emma. She's 23 now. Margaret's world tilted. David has a daughter. Had. Has. She doesn't know what he did, doesn't know he's in prison. Her mother told her that David was a donor, nothing more. But Emma's been asking questions lately, wanting to know about her biological father's medical history, his background. And I don't know what to tell her. Tell her the truth, Margaret said. That her father is a convicted attempted murderer. A sociopath who tried to poison his wife. Yes. Because what if she has children someday? What if whatever is wrong with David can be passed down? She deserves to know what she might be dealing with. And besides, the truth is kinder than any lie you could tell. Patricia nodded slowly. Would you be willing to talk to her? To tell her your story? She needs to hear it from someone who survived him. 2 weeks later, Margaret met Emma at a coffee shop in Portland. Emma looked nothing like David. She had her mother's dark hair and eyes, but there was something in the set of her jaw, the calculating way she observed her surroundings, that made Margaret's stomach clench. Thank you for meeting me, Emma said, stirring her coffee nervously. My grandmother told me some things about David. My father. I need to know if they're true. They're true, Margaret said gently. All of it. She told Emma everything. The poisoned breakfast, the trial, the conviction, the cold-blooded way David had planned her murder. Emma listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation. When Margaret finished, Emma was quiet for a long time. I've always felt different, she said finally. Like there's something wrong with me. I have trouble connecting with people emotionally. I understand intellectually how relationships work, but I don't feel them the way other people seem to. And I've always wondered if it was something genetic, if I inherited it from my father. Have you talked to a therapist about this? Margaret asked. Yes. She diagnosed me with antisocial personality traits. Not full disorder but traits. She says I have a blunted affect, difficulty with empathy, a tendency toward manipulation. But she also says I have self-awareness, which David apparently never had. I know there's something different about me, and I work to compensate for it. That's already more than David ever did, Margaret said. He never saw his lack of empathy as a problem. He saw it as an advantage. I don't want to be like him, Emma said, and there was genuine distress in her voice, perhaps one of the few genuine emotions she was capable of. I don't want to hurt people. But I'm afraid it's inevitable. That sooner or later, I'll do something terrible because I don't have the emotional breaks that normal people have. Margaret reached across the table and took Emma's hand. You're not him. You're aware of your limitations and you're working to manage them. That's the difference between you and David. He reveled in what he was. You're fighting against it. That matters. Does it? Emma asked. Or am I just better at hiding it? How do I know I won't wake up one day and decide that someone I'm with is more valuable dead than alive? Because you're here, Margaret said. Because you sought out the truth about your father instead of hiding from it. Because you're in therapy, working on yourself. Because you care enough to be afraid of becoming like him. David never cared. That's the fundamental difference. They talked for 2 more hours. Margaret shared resources, support groups for people with antisocial personality traits who wanted to live ethical lives, strategies for managing emotional deficits, ways to build healthy relationships even with limited empathy capacity. Can I ask you something? Emma said as they were leaving. Do you hate him? My father. Margaret considered. No. I did for a long time. But now, I feel nothing for him. He's just a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when someone chooses to act on their worst impulses instead of fighting against them. You're choosing differently, Emma. That's what matters. And so, my dear listeners, we come to the end of Margaret's story. But in many ways, it's not an ending at all. It's a beginning. Margaret Chen survived because she trusted her instincts. Because when every logical part of her brain said she was being paranoid, crazy, overly suspicious, she listened to that quiet voice deep inside that said something is wrong. How many of us ignore that voice? How many times have you felt uncomfortable, unsafe, uncertain, but talked yourself out of it because you didn't want to seem paranoid or rude or difficult? Margaret's story is a reminder that your intuition is valid. Your fear is reasonable. Your desire for safety is paramount. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust yourself. And if you're in a situation that feels dangerous, please, reach out for help. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Talk to a trusted friend or family member. Make a plan. Get out. You don't need proof that someone is trying to hurt you to leave. You don't need evidence that your life is in danger to protect yourself. Your instincts are enough. Margaret turned her trauma into purpose. She built a foundation that has saved dozens of lives. She changed laws. She gave people permission to trust themselves. But the most important thing she did was survive. And then, she thrived. If you're facing something similar, know that you can too. This is Aunt Clara, reminding you to trust your instincts, protect yourself, and never, ever ignore that inner voice that's trying to keep you safe. Stay safe out there, my dear listeners. Until next time. Before you go, I need you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to Tales with Aunt Clara if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could save your life. Second, share this video with everyone you know. Someone in your life might need to hear Margaret's story. Someone might be ignoring their instincts right now. This video could save a life. Third, drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had a gut feeling that saved you? Have you ever ignored your instincts and regretted it? Your story could help someone else. And if you're currently in a situation where you feel unsafe, please reach out for help. The resources are in the description below. Thank you for watching Tales with Aunt Clara. Remember, your intuition exists for a reason. Trust it.